fear, and safety. Families are worried about going to work, going to everyday places, or even sending their children to school. And beyond that, Black and brown individuals, even US citizens, are feeling targeted simply because of how they look. So tonight, it is about creating a space of accurate information, clarity, and trusted resources, because having the right information can make a real difference. My name is Allison Furtado, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, South Broward Alumni Chapter, and an International Awareness and Involvement Committee member. I will be your moderator this evening. We are honored to be joined by an incredible group of advocates and legal experts. I would like to introduce you first to Sandra Fish Matherin. She is from the Florida Immigrant Coalition. Sandra brings over 19 years of experience in community development, advocacy, program management, and a strong focus on family stabilization and service delivery. Originally from Haiti and a longtime South Florida resident, she is deeply committed to community engagement and equitable access for all. At the Florida Immigrant Coalition, Sandra leads strategic initiatives in service delivery and expansion, supporting programs that directly impact immigrant families across the state. We also have Roberto Wong. He's also from the Florida Immigrant Coalition. And Roberto was born in Lima, Peru, and came to Miami with his family at the age of 12 in search of a better life. After high school, without a clear immigration pathway, he spent years living in the shadows. His journey shifted when he became involved in immigrant youth movement and founded community through FLIC. Today, his work focuses on advocacy, education, and empowering others. Roberto will guide us through Know Your Rights and family preparedness. And finally, we have from the Florida Legal Services, Nicole Avila Esquire. Nicole is the Director of Survivor Advocacy Project at Florida Legal Services. She has over 10 years of experience as an immigration and victim rights attorney and works with survivors of human trafficking, domestic violence, and other crimes. She is nationally recognized speaker and brings expertise in immigration relief, trauma-informed advocacy, and legal protection. Nicole will help us understand legal processes, protection, and options available to families. Tonight's conversation will cover the current immigration landscape, know your rights, family preparedness, legal processes, and policy updates. So let us begin the conversation. Sandra, let's start with you. Can you tell us about your role at FLIC and how your work connects to what families are experiencing on the ground?
Good evening, everyone. My role at the Florida Immigrant Coalition, I'm the Director of Services. Under my department, we have the following services that we offer, which are naturalization, Know Your Right presentation, and then we also have a hotline that we connect people with also legal services partners.
How does your work connect to what families are experiencing on the ground?
All these services are services that are much needed for the community, And then this is where our services also at a free cost that we provide to them. In terms of for people to know your right, which is very crucial right now, this is where we connect with the community, where we provide the Know Your Right presentation, which they will know what their rights are constitutionally. We also provide the power of attorney, and we provide legal consultation to the community in order to see what are their different pathways. We also offer to legal permanent resident the pathway to complete their application into becoming a U.S. citizen. To a hotline, this is where right now many of our community, I can say from the year started to now, we have received over 20,000 calls where at least over 15,000 is for legal services. A lot of time people calls to let us know that, hey, my husband just got apprehended in the street. I don't know what to do, where to go. Can you guys provide assistance? We have people calling also for food service, for rental assistance. So therefore, the hotline is available to them. So those are the different ways that I would say that my position serve and assist the community.
So in reference to what you are hearing from the community, what are the concerns coming mostly to your service? So what are the things that you mostly serve from your organization?
Yes. So, just going a little bit deeper from the services that I just explained in terms of that. So, one of the main area it's legal services. It's people that their family members are being deported, people that are calling because either a family member or friend was picked up by ICE, people that also have concerns about their status because we are also combating a lot of misinformation and disinformation in the community. So with that, we also having to work with our community, even though legal permanent resident people with green card should have been a very safe place for people to be at right now. There's a big issue with people fearing to complete the application to becoming U.S. citizen. So all these questions throughout our hotline, we receive this information, and also when we have different events that we post that people attend so they can receive those services.
Are there any new policies, program, or enforcement changes that people should be aware of? Are you
Yes. So one of the big issue that people might not be aware of, Florida took the lead in an anti-immigrant bill, which is the bill that is SB 1718. So in that bill, there are many of them that we're seeing into effect right now. I can just name a few, which universal driver's license. So while other states, there's about 19 of them that offers that, but when you come into Florida, it is not accepted when immigrants have those driver's license. So they will be punished according to Florida law with bringing that license. We have also at the hospital where they're asking people to share what their status is that they're requiring the nurses, doctors, or at registration for people to provide that information when they go to the hospital. And we also have something that is very important. Although that law was a little bit, I would say watered down, but it's also important for people to know that coming into Florida with an immigrant, illegal immigrant, that can cause, I would say, disciplinary action from the government with that law, with the SB 1718. There's also the transportation program, which is something as well that is into that bill. So therefore, those continue to affect us in Florida because we had already taken that lead into having that anti-immigrant bill before everything happened. One of the space to actually watch coming up, changes that are coming, it's also the state issued either ID or driver's license coming soon in Florida. Well, on your driver's license, you would have to indicate whether you are a U.S. citizen or non-citizen. So this is to come, I believe, around January of 2027 in there. Also, we are looking a lot of potential detention, just like Alligator Alcatraz and those other detention center that they're looking to build more into Florida.
Thank you, Sandra. This question can go for Sandra or any of the panelists in regards to the redistricting that we are seeing currently, that has just changes in the Florida congressional with the district map. Can anyone of you explain what redistricting is and how these changes may impact immigrant communities and communities of color? I'm going to throw that out right now to any of the panelists.
Sure. Now, the redistricted maps did pass the House and Senate in the state of Florida. It's expected that the governor will sign it. And what it's attempting to do is to dilute the power of immigrant populations and people of color in areas that are more historically, or at least in the last several decades, have larger populations that identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so it would merge those districts or form them in a way that adds people who don't identify that way, who have historically voted Republican, to make the districts majority Republican. So that's the goal. My take on this as a person who votes and not as a director at Florida Legal Services is that what this means for us as people who can vote is that we need to go out and vote, so that those folks who cannot are able to get some protection from their elected officials around the state.
And that was my next question, actually, to present. How might this affect representation? And why does it matter when we think about voting power? So I think we touch on that in the sense that it's important that we voice our opinion and let our elected officials know in that regard of the redistricting.
Absolutely. And I do know that elected officials, even though our own congressional delegation might not be folks that we agree with, I do know that their staff has to go through all of the comments and things that they receive. And so it is still important to remain engaged and contact our representatives, even, their voicemails might be full. There's emails, there's letters, and there's other ways so that they do know, because otherwise in the congressional record later on, they can say, well, nobody said this was an issue. Even though we know they might not be really listening, but at least somebody in their offices can look at those things, and they're supposed to go through all of them, and show that there is a real human impact to the things that they're doing in Tallahassee or in Washington, on folks on the ground. And they can't later say, well, nobody said that this was an issue. We thought everything was totally fine. And so that it is important to remain engaged in that way.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Turning to you, Roberto. Roberto, I would like to bring you in the conversation and talk about know your rights. When we talk about know your rights, what are the most important rights people should know regardless of status?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, it gets lost on folks that constitutional rights apply to everyone, right? Like the Constitution was written, even though at the time only certain individuals could take advantage of those rights. It was open-ended. It was written for everyone, and so well, there's a lot that we can really talk about. That there's just two very specific ones that we want folks to really hone on, and to really, if they're gonna forget everything else but remember something, it will be these two. First, folks have the right to remain silent. That comes from the Constitution, comes from the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, the Fifth Amendment. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to not answer any questions. You have essentially the right to not be coerced to also give an answer, right? Now, does that mean that right will not be, that law enforcement doesn't have the ability to try to trick you or try to convince you that if you say something, that everything will be all right? No, your right can be violated, and we see it time and time again, even more so nowadays that we have cameras, right? So, but you still have it, and you still have the right to exercise it, and the best way to exercise it is by remaining silent, right? You don't have to answer any questions that you're not comfortable with. You don't have to sign any documents that you're given, even if you can understand it. And for immigrant community, even if you speak English, if English is not your native language, but even if you understand it, and let's say I'm a Spanish speaker, if they give me a document in Spanish and I can understand it, I don't have to sign anything. Folks would be surprised to know the amount of people that would come to one of the legal consultation events we have, and then while you start asking questions, it turns out folks signed the document thinking everything was going to be all right, and it turns out they signed their own deportation, which at that point, there's really very, very little that you can do, right? So, again, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to answer any questions that you don't feel comfortable answering to. As a matter of fact, that you don't have an attorney present with to help you with, right? And you don't have to sign any documents that you're presented, even though, again, they may try to trick you into cooperating. The other one is the Fourth Amendment, the fact that we have a right to not be subjected to unreasonable search and seizure. Again, with cameras, we're seeing that there's more often in public, right, where folks are getting detained. It began a long, long time ago. In more recent times, around the 2010s in Arizona with the immigration law that you would allow law enforcement to profile folks and ask them for their papers. Then Florida created a copycat law as well. And all these other states, right, started coming up with their own things. But essentially, your Fourth Amendment allows you to either give consent or not, to be searched, right? How does that apply in practice? Well, pretty simple. If you're not being detained, you have the ability to walk away. If you can ask if am I being detained? If the answer is no, then you just safely and calmly walk away from that interaction, right? And I think when I want to hone that on the calmly part, because unfortunately, our immigrant community is already in an alert mode where they're thinking, oh my God, like folks are paranoid with reason, and they're concerned about like if I do something wrong, what's that's gonna cost for me and my family, right? So, if you are being detained, you're being stopped, you're going to be questioned. You can ask the question. If they don't give an answer and they're still trying to get a response from you, calmly just remain calm, and just verbally say, I do not consent to any searches. And this also the way for us, it translates to, for example, private property like your home. You don't have to open the door if law enforcement is coming to talk to you. You can talk to them through, if you have a camera, if you have a peephole, if you have a window, you can talk to them through those spaces. Because for them to come in, they would need either your consent or they would need a search warrant. And if they don't have a search warrant, then they don't have the right to go in unless you give them your consent. So, again, we want folks to, if they're going to take anything from today, is one, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have the right to not sign any documents that your counsel has not helped you with, to understand. And then you have the right to say if you're free to go, if you're being questioned, and if you're being searched, they have the right to tell them, hey, I don't consent to this search. And then from then on, the first thing you would do is connect with an attorney, to see if there's something that happened that shouldn't have happened.
You want to elaborate on anything in regards to that, Nicole?
Yes, I would. Thank you. So, Roberto is absolutely right. And those are the things that we want people to know most of all is you have the right to remain silent. Whether folks, when they are nervous, they have experienced trauma and they're in a very tense situation with a law enforcement officer, whether they're going to have the ability to remain silent in that moment is a completely different question. So what I usually tell my clients, I equip them with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center has what's called the red card. And that card has listed, and I have shared it with our organizers, so they will be able to share it with you all afterwards. You can print your own or order them online. And Flick also has wonderful resources on Know Your Rights that you can pull up online. And so, there we go. So the card says exactly what your rights are. And people, what I tell my clients is read this out loud. And that is it. That is all you're going to say. Because they will continue to ask you questions and they will tell you things like, no, if you just tell me, I'll let you go. I just need to know. And they will not let you go. And then you have handed them the information that they need to continue with this process. They only need reasonable suspicion that somebody has committed an immigration violation, which is very different from probable cause that a crime has been committed. An immigration violation, for the most part, it is a civil offense. It is not a crime. And with regards, I did want to highlight, and I will send in the chat links to what those warrants look like, because what ICE often has is an administrative warrant. An administrative warrant means that only ICE or somebody, an immigration judge, maybe has looked at this thing. Maybe the judge looked at the case and determined somebody was removable. And then ICE issued this warrant. ICE is an executive agency. It is that our immigration court is not a court like we think about, like our criminal courts or like our county or civil courts that we would see here in Broward County or in any other part around the state. It is sort of like the DMV in the way that it's structured. It is an executive agency that is part of the executive. The judges are not judges, but hearing officers. And so it's a little bit different. There is no impartial third party that has looked at this warrant to say, yes, this person is removable, and that's why ICE has the right to approach them. So the administrative warrant, and I will send an example, gives ICE the right to approach somebody in a public place where they're already allowed to be. So if you're at your place of employment and it's an area where it's employees only, ICE is not generally allowed to be there. If I, as a member of the public, can't just walk into all of the doors and the locked offices and the backside of your place of employment, if I'm not allowed to be there as a member of the public, then they're not allowed to be there either. Unless somebody gives them consent, which is the big piece. And consent can be very tricky because it doesn't have to be the owner of the house or the owner of the place of employment. It's anyone that's allowed to be there, even in the home. So when I advise clients on this issue, I tell them, everyone in your family should know this. Anybody who's in the house regularly. One of the things that I've done in the past, and I don't have any right now, but I've printed those red cards in door tags, door hangers, for clients to put on the inside of their door. Because when ICE knocks, or for us here in Florida, it could be local law enforcement. All of our sheriff's offices cooperate with ICE. And so they have that front of mind right there on the door. With regards to the search warrants for the home, again, ICE can execute a search warrant. A search warrant usually has to be a judicial one that gives them the right to search a specific place at a specific, within 2 weeks of a specific date and time for a specific set of items. It can't just be everything everywhere all the time. And only if they have that warrant, and only if it is correct, and only if it's signed by a judge, which they almost never have, then do they need entry into the home. As Roberto mentioned, talk to them through the Ring camera, put it up against the window, or ask them to put it up against the window so you can review it. Ask them to stick it under the door if it fits under there, but do not like even crack the door open, because then they can say, well, I saw that there was something questionable inside the house and then I had to come in. So we don't want to open that door for any purpose, or else we're getting really close to granting entry.
So continuing with that conversation in regards to ICE, if you're approached by ICE, what should, especially if they're entering school, churches, or workplace, what advice would you give the community on how to approach the ICE officers?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is, and we talked about it, right, is remain silent. I think a lot of folks need your reaction, and this is even my personal experience. I came as a country as an immigrant when I was younger, and a lot of times I heard people say, "Hey, somebody asks you, you tell them you're a citizen, and they won't bother you anymore." And it's a big problem because that first of all, that's not the case. We've seen U.S. citizens get detained. We've seen everything from folks that Puerto Rican in the Midwest to veterans in New York getting detained. So the fact that if you're a citizen, it doesn't matter. You can get detained, right? So that's one problem. Second problem with that is that it's a felony. Like saying you're a U.S. citizen, it's a felony. And if you're hoping that one day you fix your immigration status, then that makes you inadmissible completely. So first, don't lie. It's better to remain silent. Do not lie. Second, don't give false documents. And our immigrant community, sometimes in desperation, they resort to carrying documents that they should probably not have on their hand or use at all. So if you do have them, if you know somebody that carries them, it's better to leave them at home, honestly. And then this one, it's a bit of a gray area for some folks. Some folks that I've heard, hey, it's okay, or maybe, and then others that say you shouldn't, is some folks feel the need to identify themselves, not just verbally, but in terms of an identification, right? If they don't have access to a driver's license, a community ID, some folks have felt the need to carry their own passport, maybe a consular ID. In our view, and with the folks that we've talked about, that can potentially speed up your deportation process, right? And so if you have it, if you're getting detained, I mean, honestly, might as well leave that document at home because you're getting detained anyways. And then it gives you a little bit of buffer time to kind of figure out what that next step looks like. And again, to reiterate, don't sign any documents before you speak with a lawyer. It's just simply put, you could be signing your own deportation, even if you understand it, the language that it was written in. Yeah, it's, we want folks to give themselves every opportunity to be able to work this in immigration court or whatever that process looks like.
I just want to ask questions regarding law enforcement and ICE support. I know counties are obligated. I can't remember what was the bill, the SB, whatever, that all counties officers or sheriff office is associated with ICE, but municipality police officers are not obligated to work with ICE. Can you elaborate on the MOU that the ICE and the counties have to sign in order for them to be part of the ICE functions?
Okay. So the SB 1718 very strongly encouraged law enforcement agencies around the state to cooperate with ICE and to sign what's known as a 287G agreement. 287G is the section of the Immigration and Nationality Act that essentially deputizes local sheriff's offices and agencies to do immigration enforcement actions. Most often, What we see in Florida with regards to 287G agreements is detainers for folks that are in local jails or in state prisons on some sort of, for whatever reason, if there's an arrest, whatever detention they get, what is known as an ICE hold. And so the local agency is supposed to hold them for no longer than 48 or 72 hours. And if ICE doesn't pick them up within that time frame, then they're supposed to be released if they've been otherwise asked to be released on bond. So what we've seen happen in some areas of the state, and I do hear reports that this has maybe alleviated in Orange County, it's not so much the case, was that they were changing the dates on the detainers to make sure that they were holding people in for long enough for ICE to pick them up. There is a recent report from the American Immigration Council that talks about detention data most recently. And so even though we've seen awful images coming out of places like Minnesota earlier this year, the rates of detention are actually much higher in both Florida and Texas. Texas is number one. I think Florida is number two. And the reason why that is because we have so many 287G agreements with our local police forces that are helping ICE to do these enforcement actions much more quietly. Some of the things I've seen locally here in Broward have included Florida Highway Patrol pulling people over for supposed traffic violations on the highway, and then requesting to see documents. And then ICE gets called in. For a couple of months ago, earlier this year, we were seeing a lot of that with regards to folks driving like landscaping trucks, at least around Sunrise area, 595. And so those are locally what we've seen the most of. So one of the things that we do at Florida Legal Services is we operate the Domestic Violence Legal Advice Hotline. And some of the calls that we've gotten through there, sometimes survivors are the ones that get arrested because there's no language access, or so many reasons why the survivor is the one that gets arrested in that moment, which means if the survivor is an immigrant, they might now have an ICE hold and now end up in immigration proceedings instead of the abuser, and of being able to deal with the trauma of the abuse and dealing with the legal issues associated with that. But it does seem like in Florida, because of our strong cooperation between our law enforcement agencies and the federal government with regards to immigration enforcement, that we are seeing much higher rates of arrests that are way less flashy or loud, but the numbers are much higher.
Yeah, if I could add also the numbers. Thank you, Nicole and Roberto, for sharing that. But the 287G, it's so silent in Florida. What we're seeing that happen in Minnesota, Florida is way above that. And we're talking about an average of 5,000 or more daily. And now there is a request for that number to grow to 6,000 of arrests daily. And yes, traffic stop, and also think about your light not working, they stop you, then it become an immigration issue. So absolutely that deputizing the police officers to do that work is very important for the community to know that it is absolutely happening in Florida. And we also have to take into account when we're talking about this agreement, we're talking also about universities that also have police officers that sign this agreement in these colleges, in these universities as well, and all over the counties in Florida.
Thanks for that information. One of the other things that we are curious to know, in regards to ICE. As a bystander, if you see something, what should we do as bystanders? Should we just stay apart from, if we see something that's going on wrong? 'Cause like again, in Minnesota, you have bystanders intervening with ICE, and we saw what happened. What should we do legally or to protect ourselves? Should we just walk away? Anyone can give us guidance
Sure.
on
So-
what we need to do when we are faced with situations like that.
And so I will say safety first for everybody involved. If you feel safe enough that you can record, and recording is absolutely allowed. There is no expectation of privacy in public. And if you're in your own house, then you have the right to record. Other people don't have the right to record you, but you have the right to record. But if you're out in public, there is no expectation of privacy. You can record. In Florida, there was a Senate bill that went into effect last January. It was Senate Bill 184, which prohibits getting within 25 feet of law enforcement officers to interfere with law enforcement or harass the officer after receiving a verbal warning to stay back. So the recommendation is to stay back at least 25 feet. Hopefully you can still hear or at least record, or keep very accurate notes of what's happening, or narrate what's happening as it's happening if possible. If you're, again, safety first. And there are some of us that have more privilege when it comes to encounters with law enforcement. And so those of us are who should be in the front lines, because safety is primordial so that we can all get through this. But be mindful of that, and that it doesn't escalate the situation for the person who is being directly impacted by ICE. But recording is okay in whatever manner that is, or keeping what we would call in law contemporaneous notes. So whether you're voice memoing or writing down like immediately after it happened, there is a hotline for reporting this type of ICE activity. It's the RACE hotline, and I'm not sure if that's the one that Sandra was also mentioning earlier today. And that will also be in the resources that are shared after the presentation, where you can report ICE activity or detention and things like that.
So, on question now would come to you, Nicole. On a legal perspective for individuals who are applying for visa, what does the visa process look like right now? And what should applicants expect after 5?
It's a very broad question, but so I'll start by saying that the Immigration and Nationality Act has been compared in complexity to the tax code. And so there are a lot of different visas, a lot of different avenues for relief. For immigrant visas right now, there is a pause on immigrant visas for folks that are from 39 countries that were designated in one of the executive orders. And theoretically, what that means is that they're going to be reviewed extra. They're doing some additional vetting is what they're saying. We don't know what that means in practice on how long this pause will be. What we do know is that current processing times have slowed down significantly. For example, for visas for survivors of human trafficking who have cooperated with police, what's known as a T visa. The data shows that they are adjudicating, I believe, is about 2 in 10 visas. With the current adjudication trend and the rate of new filings, I think we're looking at several decades for new visas to be granted, if processing times don't improve. If they were to improve to the rates that they were adjudicating at even a year or two ago. I think we're looking at a visa file today probably being adjudicated in 9 years. That's for a victim of trafficking. For a victim of another crime, another qualifying crime, what's known as the U visa, there are over, this is an outdated number, so it's probably much higher now, but 230,000 visas pending. There are only 10,000 visas available every fiscal year. And so theoretically, there could only really, the only answer is it's going to last about 25 to 30 years for a U visa to be granted, unless Congress changes the visa cap. For victims of domestic violence, there is what's called a self-petition under the Violence Against Women Act. It applies to people of all genders. Currently, the processing times for that type of relief is, I believe, almost 4 years, about 3.5, 4 years. For those folks, if they're also eligible to immediately apply for a green card, they can get a work permit while that visa is pending, while that self-petition is pending. For T visas and U visas, that's not always necessarily the case. And so people who are waiting on a T visa or a U visa to be granted or to be adjudicated might not have a work permit for several years, if not until the visa is adjudicated in however many years that is. That also means that their children who were under 21 at the time of the visa application, once they turn 21, they cannot get married. They'll lose eligibility as a derivative if they get married. And there is a very long time to ask somebody to put their lives on pause for potential relief that could last decades. For folks that are trying to come in from outside the country to get a visa, I don't have any recent data on that because we don't do a lot of that at Florida Legal Services. But I think it's fair to say that every single type of process for any kind of relief has slowed down significantly. And some are at a standstill because of these pauses for additional vetting that the executive has ordered.
Thanks for that information, Nicole. Back to you, Roberto. Nicole, you can chime in as well. We're going to discuss about family preparedness. Again, things happen and we need to get prepared. We are not quite sure what will happen with ICE, where they take these families to. So, Roberto, what is a family preparedness plan? And what should families be doing right now in order to prepare and documents and plans that they should have in place just in case they're being detained? So
this applies to everyone regardless of status. I want to stress this very much. I think we don't think enough of when whether you were born here or you were able to adjust your status to some in some way or another. I think we a lot of times forget to take care of ourselves and our families. So I want to stress is that these plans are not only for folks that are in the process and in some immigration process, or they are undocumented, or just came to the U.S. This is for everyone, regardless of status, and also stressing the fact that a lot of immigrant families have mixed statuses, right? So some young child may have been born here, and their parents are still in the process. Their cousin might be a naturalized citizen. So again, this applies to all families regardless of status. So everybody should be thinking about this. So for us, family preparedness has three things. One is knowing your rights, which we have talked about, and there's even more things that we could talk about in terms of constitutional rights, but knowing your rights, that's one pillar. Having information and knowing it really how to exercise it is a priority. Second of it is creating an emergency contact list. Who's gonna pick up your kids if you end up detained? Even if it's just for the one time, are they in the emergency contact list in school? Do you have, if you have somebody that's medically dependent, or de depends on medical on has a medical condition, has some treatments that they have to do. Who's gonna take care of them? Who's gonna make that decision? So creating an emergency contact list of who's your doctor, if you have one, if you have an attorney or you work with a nonprofit organization, then they're taking care of your case. Who's gonna again pick up your kids from school, walk your dogs if you have any. Who are those trusted individuals that not just the head of the households should know, but everyone. And again, I want to pull from my own experience. I remember fondly how my mom tried to shield us from the immigration processes, and we wouldn't talk about it. It's something that it's just she's taking care of it, so like I don't have to think about it. I just have to focus on school. Well, thankfully nothing happened, but what if something had? I wouldn't have known who to call. Who's going to take care of me and my siblings, right? So this is an opportunity for really the families to get to know about what's going on, to talk about it before it happens. And so again, not just head of the household, but also kids, if they are old enough to be able to understand some things. Again, who do I have to call, right, to take care of things? And the last part is about gathering important documents. If you can have a place where you can keep originals and then make copies of those. And then if you have trusted individuals that you can give copies of those, that's the best system. If you can have it on the cloud as well to access in a heartbeat, that's also great. And we're talking about personal documents that folks have. So proof of identity like passports, driver's licenses, consular IDs, birth certificates, immigration paperwork if you're going through any of this process. Proof of physical presence doesn't happen as often now, but I do remember Trump administration of immigration cases where they were be able to be adjudicated in favor of the applicant because they had a receipt of somewhere that proved that they were here in the U.S. Receipts of utilities, rent, mortgages, car registration, bank statements, and paychecks if you have any. Those are really useful. This is a big one, and again, it may not be enough sometimes, but proof of good moral character. If you attend church, if you're part of any PTA, or if you are in any organization that you can think of, and you build these great relationships, folks that you trust to be asked, hey, would you be willing to write a letter about me that proves that I have good moral character? Those are really, really important. Your faith leaders, if you have any, or if you are one, right? And something that again we are not thinking about a lot. But okay, so you have these documents. You have this emergency contact list of who's going to pick up your kid when you don't show up the first time. But what happens all the other times? If you end up in a long detention, if you end up in deportation, what's going to happen? Who can access your bank account, send you your money back to your country? If you have a property, who's going to be able to sell it, right? That doesn't happen just because you ask ChatGPT to do it. You need legal documents. So we're talking power of attorney, guardianship forms, medical guardianship forms, all those documents that need to be reviewed by an attorney. Having those on hand is really great. And we can talk about resources and something that we'll share later on. We have events specifically designed to create these documents that you can have ready to go in case somebody in the family finds himself in detention or deportation. And just other documents, medical records important to keep if somebody has a medical condition. I know Nicole talked about folks that are cooperating with police or they're victims of a crime. Sometimes those documents do require you to have for the police to cooperate with you. So that's another hurdle. But if you do have them, copies of those as well, they do serve. They do serve. Could serve you well in the long run as well.
I would add
Yes.
also, I'm sorry, you mentioned medical records. If you don't have the stuff, and maybe there's a medically needy child who has ongoing medical treatment, I would also advise having pre-signed releases for those offices We're going through this right now with a client of mine who's detained, and it's much harder to get all of those things to happen when somebody's in detention. So having pre-signed releases of information for any doctors, therapists, anyone that you think could benefit your case down the road. It's not impossible, but it takes much longer for us to be able to get signatures once somebody is in detention. And I did want to say something, because Roberto, you mentioned putting it into ChatGPT. Definitely don't do that. The other thing I want to highlight about that and using AI engines to do any sort of legal research or legal process, those things are not privileged. They are not confidential. There is no attorney-client relationship between any person and ChatGPT or Claude or whoever, which means that they are discoverable. If the government really wanted to, they could subpoena ChatGPT or Claude, OpenAI, whoever else does AI, and get all of that information that you just put in there to draft this, whatever it is that you were trying to draft. So be very mindful, be very careful of using AI for any purposes where if you were talking to an attorney, it would be privileged. That privilege does not extend to the internet.
Information. That's a lot to, again, it doesn't only apply to immigration. This is something that is needed for everyone, and just in case anything happened to us, not immigration related, but anything that can happen to within our lives, we need to have these documents secure. So thanks for that information. And I think you shared the family preparedness within the link regarding what documents and information is needed in order to get these things quickly. Nicole, I also want to stress regarding immigration hearings, to dive down a little bit more in regards to legal matters regarding what happened at an immigration hearing, how should we prepare ourselves for legal representation just in case we are detained. So let us talk about those first, and then we go into some more questions regarding detain and deportation and the TPS. So let us dive one by one in these sectors. What should people expect in an immigration hearing? So let us discuss that first, and then we move on.
So I do want to distinguish when you hear me say an immigration hearing, it will be something that's happening in immigration court. I know a lot of times folks will just kind of use hearing interchangeably with like interview. So there are different agencies that do different pieces of the immigration system. So for this piece, we're talking about removal proceedings or deportation proceedings that happen in front of an immigration judge in court. And so for those hearings, people who are in proceedings have to be present at hearings. If they are not present at hearings, they will have an order, what's called in absentia, entered. So an order entered in their absence. They have to have a very, very, very good reason and only a very, very, very short amount of time to dispute an in absentia order. And so I know what's happening. We see the reports, and we see it when we're in court that ICE is doing enforcement actions in immigration courtrooms. It's been happening throughout the last year and a half, but I've heard from colleagues it's happening recently again, where the Department of Homeland Security will move to dismiss the case. And so now the person's no longer in proceedings, and ICE is waiting right outside the door of the courtroom to arrest them, because now they don't have anything pending. There's no relief. And so many attorneys are fighting back and not taking the dismissal, whereas 2 years ago, we would have been like, yes, the case was dismissed. Perfect. Now we can go and do the things that we need to do before the other parts of the agency. That's not the case anymore. They're doing it specifically to have people there and ready for them to be detained. And so attorneys are fighting back on that piece, on not taking the dismissal and continuing with the process, for better or worse, because there are so many cases pending before EOIR. There's no way we're going to get through them before 2029. So ideally, hopefully the cases are being set out. I know I have colleagues that have said they have cases set out to 2030. And so my best case is that the case gets set out to sometime after January 2029. And we get to fight it in a different setting, hopefully. But folks have to still show up to their hearings. Make sure that you're being advised by an attorney. There's always been a very, very significant difference between success at immigration court being represented versus being unrepresented. That's always been the case, and even more so now. I know resources are scarce and the need is great. We do have an immigration court help desk at Florida Legal Services as well, and I will send that information out to the organizers to share with everybody. And they provide advice and referrals and some direct representation in immigration cases to help people through the immigration process in court. But really, I think the best advice I can give is be informed about the process, get the legal advice that you need. Sorry, my dog wants to participate too. But get the legal advice that you need. There are many resources for legal advice and referrals at a minimum, and connect with one of, with FLIC or FLS or any of these wonderful organizations that can point you in the right direction and get you the help that's appropriate for being in court.
Can you explain the TPS case before the Supreme Court at this time, if you have any information?
I do have information.
Uh-huh.
It's very preliminary. So I'll start with, we don't really know from the arguments themselves how the court's going to rule. I will say that this case, while the impact is very much on real people, the Supreme Court tends to try and avoid reaching those questions, and they will try to deal with it on a procedural basis as much as possible. And that seems to be what is happening from my review of the transcript. Several of the justices really pressed the government attorney on trying to nail down his argument. The government is arguing that the statute says that the designation of temporary protected status is a decision that is up to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security that cannot be reviewed by the courts. And so the government is saying anything that's related to that decision also cannot be reviewed. That's not quite how the statute is worded. It does say that the designation itself, so the ultimate decision, is not reviewable by the courts. So if the department says we no longer need to designate Haiti or Syria for TPS, but we followed the process, then theoretically that decision would be presumably lawful, and the court could not go in and say you should not have taken away the designation. The justices did, like I said, press the government on the argument that they're making because it doesn't seem to make sense. One of the questions that one of the justices asked was basically like, so you're saying that the secretary could just post on X and say no more TPS for Syria without following any of the process, and people could not sue to try to enforce the rest of the statute, which says the secretary can take away the designation after doing A, B, C, and D. So while I think that the ultimate decision on TPS is likely not, I don't think it will be positive, as I don't know that TPS will survive. I do think that the legal rationale that they employed. I don't think the government's gonna win on the reason, although I do think that the ultimate result for the people affected is the same, whatever the middle part of it is. But in terms of the impact on the way that we think about law and statutes and the way that things are interpreted, I think there's the potential for some big impact there that I'm cautiously hopeful the justices seem to be leaning towards. That would be an absurd result, which is something the court tries to avoid, is having an absurd result. But I do think that the ultimate decision on whether TPS for Haiti and Syria will survive in the long term is unlikely. And I don't know if Sandra or Roberto have any different.
You want to have any, right? Sandra, you want to chime in on?
Just a little bit. Nicole has the upper hand in the legal part, but I also do hear you, Nicole, but I do want to put also on the table there has been a lot of surprises in the sense of even though it's discretionary for, the government to be able to make that decision, but at the same time, the way that it's being done and the reason why the TPS has been given to these countries, it's those countries are still or in worse situation than why it was given. Because a lot of time with misinformation, people understanding that it's temporary, then therefore it doesn't matter when and how they stop it, and then it's correct. But I would say also we have had different campaign and when Flick and its partners, we just had a huge one, even if it's a drop in the bucket. There has been over 600, discharge petition throughout the life of the US, and there were only 14 of them, and then the 15 one just passed in the House with people like our organization here and more that were able to discuss that, and there's 15 just passed in the House with the discharge petition. And that's the first time also it's been an immigration discharge petition. So there's light under the tunnel. Yes, we don't have the upper hand in knowing exactly what's going to happen, but that's why we are in this fight. I'm also assuming that's why we're having this conversation tonight, in order for us to continue working towards fighting these unlawful decision and approach from our government.
For sure. And I do want to say, I hope that I am very wrong for everybody's sake. I do hope that I'm very wrong. And again, we can't really tell one way or the other from how the arguments go all the time. From what I understand, we should probably expect a decision, an opinion to come down later in the term, sometime in June, on that. And I do absolutely agree with you, Sandra, that there's been a lot of involvement with the courts and with the system that has turned out very positively, and that has stopped the de-designation of Haiti and Syria and some of the other TPS countries until now. And so one of the things that I think it's important, typically for anything, not for certain types of cases, they have to show that there's a reasonable basis for why they're doing things. That's also part of the argument of what they're trying to determine on whether this is a reasonable basis case or there's some sort of higher scrutiny that needs to be employed. And so I think depending on that also, because like you mentioned, the reasons why they've de-designated TPS are very plain. They've told us exactly what they're thinking and why they're doing these things, and there does not appear to be any reasonable basis. And so I hope that that's what the court takes away. I do so far, I didn't go through all 140 pages of the transcript yet, but so far it did seem to be leaning to at least not buying the government's argument, which is a good start. But I do hope I am super wrong, and that maybe Congress one day, I know I've been saying this for my entire career, but that they'll get it together and be able to pass some humanitarian form of immigration reform that is more helpful than hurtful.
Okay. Thank you guys so far. To the audience, can you open up some Q&As? Is there any Q&A out there from the audience that we could ask our panelists? Some questions. I'm trying to see if we have any questions. But I can continue with the conversation in regards to students. So we have a lot of undocumented students within our school system. What support can we get, or what support exists for those undocumented students?
Contrary to intuition, that there is help, right? I mean, unfortunately, the undocumented students don't have access to federal grants. Depending on the state, they may or may not have access to the state scholarship. Like I know when I was undocumented here in Florida, that was not available to me, and it's still not available to undocumented students. But Texas has one, and it's still open for undocumented students in Texas, right? With very weird world we live in. But there are scholarships out there. There are resources that students can take advantage of. Right off the top of my head, I can think of the Dream.us scholarship for students that are in high school, getting ready to go to college. And depending on the college that they may choose, it could cover their full tuition. Then there's also MALDEV has a really comprehensive list of scholarships that we can share with folks. And again, I'll share those links in the chat shortly. And there's it's not as popular, but there's also private lenders that could help out depending on the eligibility that they require. And then there's a myriad of scholarships that folks can just apply. Right. So there is help out there. It's not impossible to be able to go to college. We have seen some hurdles, I will say, in Florida. I was part of the campaign in 2014 to pass in-state tuition for undocumented students, which the governor helped push a few years ago. And so that's still up there, but we haven't given up on trying to bring that back. So it's not impossible. The road is hard and littered with obstacles, but it's not impossible. And there is help out there. And I know Nicole's being quick. She moves very quickly, and she puts the links so quickly on the chat, which is thankful for that. So, but there is help out there. So, I want, as somebody that used to be undocumented, was a student here in Florida, don't give up hope. That's the last thing we gotta give up. There's always a way. There is always a way. So.
And that's good to know. That there is hope for our immigrants, students, because we have a lot here in Florida, like you said. There's a lot of undocumented students, because I know for sure, like particularly in my church, our preschool numbers have gone down due to ICE. So they're afraid to attend schools now. They're staying away from schools. And I've heard that a lot within the school communities, but at least, there is hope. We're crossing our fingers on it. Another question that was asked was, are there any bills we can ask our state and federal legislatures to support or oppose that will help during immigration crisis? Are there any bills?
the folks at Flick might have more information on those state bills, because I know that they do a lot of advocacy in that vein. I do know there's a bill that's been drafted in the Congress and federal law. I've looked at it. It seems to have bipartisan support. I'm not a huge fan of it because it does still include a lot of border enforcement and a lot of money for enforcement, ICE, and just general immigration enforcement and things like that. And so I do think that we can make small incremental steps, but it can't be at the detriment of the people it's meant to help. And so it might be idealistic, but the bills that need to happen have to be apart from immigration enforcement and some avenues for folks to be able to get immigration relief, or and not create really like a second class citizenry of like folks that will never be able to achieve citizenship status, which is what the preliminary things I've read on this bill. It would create a path to status, but not ever to citizenship. And if it was something that would enable people to work and things like that and functionally be the same, except maybe granting the people to vote the ability to vote, which I still don't think is great, but much better than the system we have now. Those maybe would be things that we can get behind. But I think our federal Congress at least seems to be at an impasse on making any forward progress on anything that would positively impact the people that need the help. And I'll turn it over to Roberto or Sandra, because I know they do more advocacy locally.
I will say for my part, off the top of my head, I don't know, I don't remember any specific bills that I'm currently tracking. I know as an org we are. But I will say this: even in Florida, there's always an opportunity, maybe not to push a bill that we want cleanly, but there's always an opportunity to water down and or stop certain bills. And it has happened in the last few years, even with the supermajority, even with the 2024 elections, and President Trump pushing his agenda, and Governor DeSantis bowing down. So even in this, Florida is at the forefront of the wrong stuff usually. Even here, we have an opportunity to slow down, to water down, to even stop some bills, some bad bills. So there's opportunities. What I would say is just stay up to date, connect with our folks on the advocacy side. Flick Votes, we're happy to connect you with them so that you can stay up to date. We just wrapped up, well, just say just, but about a month ago, we wrapped up session here in the state of Florida, and we were able to do that with a few of these bills. And then there will be special sessions. There's special opportunities in the state of Florida for when, the governor just is looking to sign as we talked about, the gerrymandering of the state and other sessions. But in essence, there are opportunities. So just stay up to date, and we do the legwork of reviewing these and working with Florida Legal Services and other organizations to review these bills and then tell you, hey, this is good, this is bad. So just stay up to date with us, and then from there it's up to you to talk to your legislators. We think everything that happens in Washington is what's more important, and it is important. And we forget that there's stuff happening locally, right? At state level, in your own municipality. Maybe, you can't push on your state representative or your federal representative in DC, but you can talk to your mayor. They're more accessible. You can talk to them, see, hey, what, is the 287G worth it? Do you have programs to help our community, our immigrant community connect to services, right? So these are things, tangible things that we can do, without, having to fight the enforcement bill that's in DC, right? So
1 second, the lights just went off. Okay.
no worries. And I did want to
That
add
was really-
one more thing, because I know Nicole talked about the appointments and folks getting taken at interviews. We at Flick, we're working with the ACLU. We have an accompaniment program that, while it does not outright stop, it won't stop somebody's detention. You can help be present, record it, get those. I forgot the legal terminology she used of taking those notes, maybe recording and being able to let their family know, hey, something happened. We train you on this. It's ideal for U.S. born citizens. So if you are a U.S. born citizen, we would hope that you consider being an ally. There's a few other requirements of transportation and being willing to be, present. But it's a way to deter and or help get out the information that, hey, your family member didn't make it out of court. Let's go call the lawyer right now, right? So we have that program working with the ACLU. Wanted to share that.
Thanks for that. So I have a couple questions from our audience. Again, we're not going to be specific, just give general responses, because we're not here to give legal advice in its entirety. But we can respond to general questions. So one question I have is regards to children with U.S. parents was born abroad. Do you have any, so I'm assuming that these parents were U.S. citizens, but the children were born abroad. How can those children become citizens?
So I hate to say this because it is the standard lawyer answer is it depends. There is a very complex chart on how people either acquired or derived citizenship from a U.S. citizen parent. I believe that person also sent a question in the Q&A, so I did send them the information to contact us directly at FLS so we can look at that case and be able to tell them more closely. But it would be a session all on its own to talk about acquiring or deriving U.S. citizenship.
Right. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. I wasn't going to be specific with that case, but just in general.
Nicole, I would also want to add the 75 countries that has the travel ban. This is also a good conversation for that person to definitely contact, lawyer FLS, like the information Nicole just posted, because even though there are possibilities, but because if you are in one of these countries, then we have those that are process halted at this point right now or pause.
Again, we know we're going to get a lot of questions regarding ICE, because ICE is a hot topic. So I know we touched on it earlier in our conversation, but one of the things, again, we're going to emphasize, because we have elections coming up in November, we still have kids in school. So the question is, what should educators do if ICE agents are waiting outside of the school? What should the educators do? So that's one question. And then again, another question in regards to ICE. Election is coming up in November. They might be at the precinct. What should we do? Or should we, people might be getting intimidated when we see them at the precinct. So what should we do and how should we go about bypassing ICE and in those regards?
So we'll start with the schools. Again, ICE is allowed to be anywhere that the general public is allowed to be. So I think where the schools have, I want to say an advantage, but there are many, I can't go to my daughter's school and walk into campus. I have to go through the front gate and I have to go to the office and I have to check in. And so, yes, they can be waiting right outside the school. They can be there. And so I think it's having that preparedness plan. Most likely, and at least what I've seen, and I'll maybe Sandra and Roberto have seen differently in the area, is when the reports early on of children being apprehended at schools, from speaking with school board attorneys, they had not seen any of the things that were being reported in my circles. And so I have not seen that a lot. And I think most of the time it's most likely them waiting for the parent rather than the child. So, and I hesitate to say to have the parents trust the teacher, because we also know that while teachers are wonderful, there are many areas in the state where that may not be a trusted person for this purpose of putting in place the preparedness plan. And so if the teacher is a safe person who can be part of that, of knowing who to contact and all that, but that's why it's important, like Roberto said, to have those folks in the list of people who can pick up your child, who can be called in case of emergency and all of that when the person does not show up or is apprehended near the school. But I have not seen, we had reports early on last year around February that children were being apprehended, but I was not able to confirm those with any sources. So I'm not sure if Sandra or Roberto have seen differently.
Another question was posted. It says, with ICE is deployed to voting precincts, do people have to show their documents to them before they're allowed to vote, or can they bypass and show them to poll workers instead? I mean, the only document we show is my driver's license.
So similar to what Roberto mentioned earlier with knowing our rights, I would say the first thing is, am I being detained? There's no reason for ICE to question you or ask you for ID. That's not their mission. That is not their jurisdiction. If they're there just to intimidate you, law enforcement is not allowed to be within certain areas of the precinct. So if I do the election poll watcher trainings, maybe help your community in that way. And again, safety first, but there's no reason for them to be there unless they have reasonable suspicion that somebody is there unlawfully. It is not part of their mandate or jurisdiction or job or mission or whatever we want to call it to intimidate voters and ask for IDs. That's not their job. There is the people who volunteer for the precinct that will be in there to check my ID and check that I'm eligible to vote, and that's their job. So I would say, unless they're telling you you're being detained, then you're free to walk away.
Same situation, but this time it's if a patient should be concerned about ICE when seeking treatment in hospitals or urgent care centers, can people be detained in these spaces?
So people can be detained anywhere that the public is allowed to be. So if ICE is allowed to be in that area, they're allowed to be there. Now, the hospital can't release information about the patient or confirm or deny whether that patient is in there if it violates HIPAA and all of those things. Does ICE have a warrant for that specific person seeking them at that place? And so whatever other confidentiality or privilege laws or rules apply in your profession, then those still apply regardless of any law enforcement being involved. Now, I know Sandra mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 1718 did add a question for medical treatment of what is your status. No one has to answer that question. In fact, what I tell folks is, especially if you're a US citizen, refuse to answer that question because it is not necessary for treatment, and they cannot deny you treatment for refusing to answer that question. And so we hold the privilege, if we are citizens, that we can, there's no risk to us declining that question. And so the less data they have, because the purpose for that question was to gather data on how much money is being spent on folks that are undocumented for medical treatment. And so the less information they have in that regard, the less data they can gather.
And I like that.
I definitely wanted to stress this. If you need medical treatment, especially emergency medical treatment, life or death, it does, I mean, just go, right? Like that shouldn't even be a question. I know it probably lingers. Oh my God, like life or death, just go. You just go and get the treatment, and they can, like Nicole said, they cannot deny you treatment. Now, whatever happens afterwards is different, but no, if you know your rights and you have a family preparedness plan, there are things that could fall in your favor. And the other point I want to stress, yeah, if you cannot go join a protest or advocate at your government, uh, you can just be an ally by just like Nicole said, saying don't refuse to answer the question. That's the simplest way to be an ally.
Yes, and I also wanted to add on that we did a whole campaign that's called Decline to Answer, because what we were seeing, we had pregnant women in different areas where they were giving birth actually, at their home and in the wrist. And then we had some people that were very ill and getting sick. So that campaign, if anybody wants to help, we have just like the Know Your Right card that Nicole spoke about and Roberto showed, and it has those cards where they can present as well in terms of decline to answer to those medical at the hospital. And the other thing, language barrier as well. I know Nicole spoke about that, and Roberto for the card. We have those Know Your Right in different languages, but if you don't speak English, you don't have to worry about reading that to the officer. The part that is going to be given to the officer, which the way that we do it, it's in English. All the information for you to know what to do, it's in your own language. But the side for the officer to understand and then reading your rights is in English, so the officer will always understand what you are saying.
Thanks for that information. Another thing that I want to get into is that there's a lot of myth versus what is truth. Have you heard any myth regarding how immigration is happening? And then can you just educate our audience that, hey, this is not true. This what is needing to be done. I mean, we discuss a lot of stuff with the family preparedness, know your rights, but do you hear anything outside of what we have discussed earlier that we can clarify that this is not true?
I can start with a couple and then the team can chime in. The travel ban is a huge one because the process has stopped for people that need new application in terms of the countries that they're stopping to process. But what people did not understand, the people that already have their visa, they can travel. So we have seen family members that could have come in to visit their family, but not understanding that because they already have their visa, that they can travel. The TPS, they are calling these people illegal, people with asylum that they're not working. These people are legal. They have their work permit. The CHNV program that they call the Biden program, the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaragua, Venezuela, these people, they have document. These people, that's why in our ecosystem, we try to avoid calling people undocumented, because it is a very broad complex where people are defining other people as being undocumented and illegal while these people are legal. Now, what the government is doing, pulling those, terminating those CPS, then these people become illegal if they don't have their document, but they have work permit, they pay their taxes, and they are legal in the country.
Yes. Can you explain to the audience what, because I've heard of the driver's license, I think it's the SB, the driver's license, the universal driver's license that is given to immigrants. That driver's license is not legal here in Florida, but is it legal in other states?
I can, and then Nicole, you might want to chime in on the legal part. There's about 19 countries which it's already happening. California, New York, those driver's license, they are legal in these countries. But Florida, because of the anti-immigrant bill, if somebody has a legal driver's license, for instance, in one of those states, let's say California, if they come to Florida and then that person is illegal, then that person is subject to disciplinary action in terms of what the law said for illegal immigrants in the state of Florida.
Sure.
Okay.
So what changed in the law in Florida is essentially if someone would not otherwise qualify for a driver's license in the state of Florida, and another state does qualify people without status for a license, that license is not valid in Florida, which means you're driving without a valid license, which means you can get arrested, etc. So it goes into that piece of it. So their driver's licenses in the state of Florida are very limited for folks without status. And even the ones that qualify for a license, it's very difficult to get. We consistently have issues at the DMV with trying to obtain licenses for folks who have the right paperwork, so to speak. And so what ends up happening is even if, like Sandra mentioned, the state of California or the state of New York or Massachusetts or wherever has licenses for that, folks don't have to prove status to obtain that license. But in Florida, they would have to prove status, then that license is not valid for them to drive in Florida.
But there is also another ID that immigrants are entitled to have. I can't remember what was the.
So there are community IDs. I'm not sure otherwise of what else, but community IDs, they're not government issued IDs. They are enough for most municipalities if you're trying to get your water turned on or seek services from an agency or something like that. Not every county does them, and Senate Bill 1718 did put in some provisions to discourage municipalities from having county or community ID programs. I believe Alachua County still has them. I don't know if Broward County still does them, and I don't know if Palm Beach County still does them. But those are the counties that I know for sure had community ID programs, and I think Miami might have had one at one point as well. But those are essentially nonprofits and municipalities got together and got some grant funding to have these IDs where people could prove identity in different ways that would allow them to access services or resources within the county, but it was not a government issued ID. So anything that required a government issued ID, they would not be able to use the community ID for.
I'm not quite sure what this question relates to from a minute. If someone do not go for their check, in what will happen? I'm not quite sure what.
Okay, so I assume that means for an ICE check-in. So some folks who were detained in the past and were released on their own recognizance or were released on bond, or folks who have a removal order and are on supervision may have check-ins yearly or twice a year or whatever with ICE. Our local office here in Broward is in Miramar. They're supposed to go. They can get apprehended. And I think in the past, we would be advising to avoid detention in certain ways, not by attending things and doing everything that you needed to do. I think where we are today in this climate, we're advising for what to do in the event of detention. I think that we need to unfortunately think in that way and be ready in the event that it happens, rather than where we were even 2 years ago, where it was much less likely, particularly for certain populations like victims of crime, because they were under a mandate not to do any enforcement activities. against victims of crime up until January of last year. So I think it's important for folks to still attend their check-ins, to still attend biometrics appointments if you're applying for some form of relief. If you don't attend biometrics appointments, then they're going to deny it for not being able to do a background check. Still attend hearings, because otherwise you're getting a removal order in your absence. There are certain types of interviews for that maybe if you no longer qualify, you can just withdraw the petition and not attend the interview or something like that. But for ICE check-ins and court proceedings, the advice is still for folks to attend as scheduled. If you're able to get an attorney or an accompany or have accompaniment from folks like the folks at Flick, I think that's always very helpful, as they might be able to explain what's happening in your case easier to the officer. I would not expect them to be nice, and I would not expect it to be smooth 100% of the time, but definitely having that accompaniment and having somebody to be able to record. I don't think you're going to be able to record video inside, but you could certainly take contemporaneous notes to report to the hotline when it's happened if there's detention. And then you could also, if you're going to a NICE check-in and you have medical issues, for instance, then I would have that information with you. We've had recently, within the last maybe 2 or 3 months, a client that went in for a check-in, and we're not 100% sure whether they did intend to. I apologize. It's obviously time for me to be with my dog. She's upset. One moment.
And while we wait for Nicole to come back and finish responding to that question, Sandra, maybe you could chime in and give some advice. Okay, you're back, people. You're mute. You're on mute. Okay.
No worries. I forgot where we were on that. I'm sorry.
If they were
yes, so we didn't know if he was going to get detained or not, but he did bring with him, he had surgery actually already scheduled for something, and he brought that information with him, and so we were able to get him on what's called alternatives to detention. So he was checking in on his phone instead, and we were able to prevent detention. So if there's something like that, or there's a child with a significant medical issue, things like that, and you have somebody accompanying you to help explain that to the officer, then there's potential alternatives. But I would not advise somebody to not go to their check-in, because they have the address. It's going, if they're going to apprehend, they're going to do it regardless. So.
And with that, maybe Sandra, you could chime in to say, again, maybe they're having legal issues or need some legal help. Where can people find free or low-cost legal help if they need to? I know your organization will recommend, but can you just chime into that service?
Yes, our hotline is one of the best place that people can call in. You can either call or text our hotline. Rob, if you can put it in the chat, the phone number for everybody. And then also we have our, we call it at the Protect the People Clinic. And then this is where people can have a free legal consultation with a lawyer. Right now, we have every Wednesday that we have a clinic happening recurrent. And with that, people can have the opportunity to speak freely and confidentially with a lawyer when they come to this clinic. And it can be found to register for this clinic at flick.org/events, or you can contact us directly, either Roberto or myself. We can put our email in there. But I also have to say that FLIC is a coalition. We have 85 plus members. We're not alone. So just like Nicole is here with us, we work with our partners. We work with lawyers in order to get the right information for you. And then so it's really a collaboration of different organizations that works together in order to provide that. So when we say that you can come to FLIC, this is where your information and the assistance kind of have different branches where we will guide you to the proper channel and then to the right people to go to and to get your legal advice and information.
Thank you, Sandra. I just want to say thank you, Sandra, Roberta, and Nicole, for sharing your expertise with us tonight. And I would also like to thank the audience for being here to receive accurate information and preparation that can make real difference regarding their immigration status. You are not alone. There are resources and people here to support you. So just want to emphasize that we have their help. The information is posted in our chat regarding Florida Legal Coalition, as well as for the Florida Legal. So let me repeat. We just posted information from Florida Immigrant Coalition, as well as from Florida Legal Services regarding their services and their advocacy projects that they offer to our community. So thank you guys for being here with us. It was appreciated to take your time to share and inform the community regarding immigration. To our audience, I would like to extend a thank you as well, and also to inform you of additional information regarding our May week. So thank you for joining us on our immigration workshop, but we would also like you to join us on other events that is being posted for the rest of this week. Upcoming May 7th, we will have Full Stream Ahead, which is conducted at Lake Forest Elementary. The link is there for registration. On May 9th, from 11 to 2 p.m., we have Sisters in Control Reproductive Health, which will be held at South Regional Broward College Library. The link is there as well. And on can't see the date on Saturday, May 9th, we have the Community Prayer Breakfast, which will be held at Club 19 in Pembroke Pines, as well as the registration. The registration link is included. So again, I would like to thank the community for joining us on this well-informed, well-needed workshop regarding immigration. I'd like to thank all my members within my committee, as well as my organization, South Broward Alumni Chapter. Just want to extend a full gratitude for us hosting this May week. And that's it for us. I mean, we have 15 minutes. If there's any additional questions or concerns, I mean, we're still open for discussion. Is there any additional questions? I'm just trying to see if there's anything. Is there anything else you guys want to share? I mean, just wrap it up. Although we have 15 more minutes, but we don't have to stay 15 minutes. But is there anything else?
Can I jump in there and can I jump in there and just say, as president of South Broward Alumni Chapter, thank you all again. You all are wonderful in terms of the information. It's very, very thorough. So thank you so much for that. And of course, I have to say thank you again as well to our International Awareness and Involvement Committee. Great job for Furtado, as well as the chair, Janice Monestein, and Assistant Chair Lisa Davenport. Hope everybody enjoyed this, took a lot of notes. Y'all gave a whole lot of information, but that's the whole point of this seminar. So thanks again.
Oh, and one note to our audience, there is a post-workshop survey that is included in the chat. If you could please complete that survey, we greatly appreciate it. So thanks everyone and have a good night.
Good night.